They say there are houses that forget how to let the living go. In the quiet town of Marrow Creek, Pennsylvania, the Pritchard estate still stands, half collapsed, its roof open to the sky like a mouth too tired to scream. Locals don't walk near it, not even on dares, because for 60 years, every woman who became a bride under its roof vanished before the dawn. The first bride was Eleanor Pritchard. In 1861, the family patriarch Samuel Pritchard had made his fortune in the early coal business, a man of rigid morals and whispered cruelty. He had 3 sons, each known for their charm and their temper. The Pritchards were admired by the town but feared in private. People said they smiled too politely at funerals. Eleanor's wedding was grand. Carriages lined the muddy road. Violinists played under the dripping chandeliers. But by morning her bridal room was empty. Her wedding dress was found hanging in the orchard, soaked through as if it had been out in the rain all night. Samuel claimed she ran away, humiliated him, dishonored the family. But her body was never found. That would have been enough for one tragedy. But then came the next bride, and the next. By 1902, 6 Pritchard men had married. 6 brides had vanished before sunrise. No blood, no struggle, just silence. The townspeople called it the marriage curse. The Pritchards called it coincidence. But when the youngest son, Thomas Pritchard, prepared for his own wedding in 1905, he broke from family tradition. He envy, they say every family builds its own ghost. Some do it with secrets, some with love that can't let go. But the Pritchards built theirs with vows. In 1827, when Marrow Creek was still a young town carved from forest and coal, Samuel Pritchard arrived from England with little more than a Bible and ambition. He was tall, thin, with a scholar's posture and a miner's hands, someone who looked like he prayed only so he could keep working afterward. Within 5 years, he owned half the coal fields in the valley. Within 10, he owned the people who worked them. The Pritchard estate rose out of the fog like a cathedral. Locals said its bell tower rang on its own during storms, though there was no bell in it. The house was built for celebration. Long dining halls, gold-trimmed windows, a ballroom that glittered with imported chandeliers. But beneath the elegance, Samuel enforced a single unbreakable rule: no divorce, no betrayal, and no disobedience between husband and wife. A vow, he said, is not a promise, it's a tether. When his eldest son, Henry, married a young schoolteacher named Eleanor Brandt, the town celebrated as if royalty had come to visit. But on the morning after the ceremony, Eleanor was gone. Her wedding dress lay folded on the bed. The window was open, though the rain had sealed the dirt outside. Her footprints went to the sill and stopped there. Samuel told the town she'd taken her own life. Her body was never found. A week later, he commissioned the first of 6 stained glass windows for the family chapel. A woman in white, hands clasped in prayer, head bowed toward her husband. Beneath the glass, the inscription read, "Until the vow is fulfilled." That was the beginning of the Pritchard legend. Over the years, the pattern continued. Every son who married lost his bride the same way, vanished within a day of the ceremony. People whispered that Samuel demanded the women take part in a ritual of union in the chapel basement. Others said the house itself swallowed them, jealous of anyone new who entered its halls. But the Pritchards never allowed outsiders inside after sundown, and by the time Samuel died in 1859, the estate was already rotting from the inside out. The last living servant left behind a single line in her journal before disappearing too. He said the house needs a bride to keep the walls breathing. When the Civil War ended and the town began to rebuild, the Pritchards were long gone from public view. The mines were sold, the chapel locked, but the house remained, standing at the edge of the valley, its windows black as eyes that refused to close. And from time to time, when fog rolled through the hollow, people swore they heard the faint chime of wedding bells coming from the woods. Ted no one but the priest. He married quietly, under candlelight, to a woman named Mary Holden, who'd worked as a caretaker for his mother. And by the next morning, she too was gone. Thomas Pritchard never spoke again. For the rest of his days, he lived alone in that hollow house, wandering from room to room, whispering the same question. Where do they go when the vow is done? When he died in 1934, his will ordered that the Pritchard estate never be sold, never reopened, and that every door inside be nailed shut from the inside. The family line ended that day, or so the town believed. But in 1978, a historian named Dr. Evelyn Carr came to Marrow Creek with a single obsession: to prove that what happened in the Pritchard house wasn't legend, but design. She called it the Pritchard pattern. For the next half-century, the Pritchards spoke of joy as if it were a sin. Samuel's surviving sons, Henry's younger brothers, Charles and Thomas, kept the estate sealed and lived by a timetable that never changed. Each morning, the bell tower rang once at 7, once at noon, once at dusk. No one ever saw who rang it. By the 1870s, the town around Marrow Creek had nearly forgotten them. The coal business passed into other hands. The mines that once fed the Pritchards' fortune filled slowly with groundwater and bats. Only a few townsfolk claimed to see the brothers walking the ridge road at night, dressed in mourning clothes, always together, never speaking. Then came the weddings again. Charles Pritchard married a widow from Pittsburgh in the spring of 1878. Her name was Margaret Hale, a woman known for her wit and independence. She was seen entering the estate in a crimson carriage. The next morning, that same carriage returned to town driverless, its lanterns still burning. Inside lay Margaret's bouquet, frozen stiff by night frost. 5 years later, Thomas wed Mary Holden, the caretaker's daughter, against his brother's wishes. They were married privately in the chapel that Samuel had built. Mary was the only bride to last longer than a night. For 3 days she was seen through the windows tending the gardens, laughing, hanging linens to dry. On the 4th, the windows went dark again. The pattern became so predictable that townspeople began timing their clocks by the disappearances. Some said the house was cursed. Others said the family's grief had turned into a sickness of the mind, a compulsion to recreate Samuel's original loss again and again, as if repetition could make sense of it. By 1905, only one heir remained. Thomas, older now, pale, his hands trembling. He ordered the entire estate nailed shut from the inside. The last thing the milkman saw was Thomas standing in the doorway, fastening the final board across the threshold. He whispered, "No one else will join." That evening the bell tower rang 7 times, though no wind stirred. After that, the house went completely silent. For decades, the Pritchard name faded into rumor. Children dared each other to touch the rusted gate and count to 10. Couples avoided the road entirely. Local officials listed the estate as uninhabited private property. But at night, farmers on the far side of the valley said they saw a light moving room to room, slow and deliberate, as if someone was still inspecting the place before a celebration. In 1934, a storm tore part of the roof away, revealing the old ballroom to the sky. For a week afterward, pieces of lace were found scattered across the fields, thin, white, hand-stitched, each flecked with candle soot. No one could explain where they'd come from. When the pieces were sewn together by a local historian, they formed the shape of a bridal veil. After that discovery, the Pritchard house was declared unsafe, fenced off and quietly forgotten again, until 70 years later, another historian arrived with her own reasons for opening its doors. Dr. Evelyn Carr was not the kind of woman who believed in curses. She was a psychologist from Ohio State University, a quiet scholar with a fascination for generational trauma, how grief, secrecy, and obsession can pass through bloodlines like an invisible disease. When she first heard the name Pritchard, it wasn't from an archive or a newspaper. It was from a patient. A young bride-to-be, trembling in her office, had spoken of dreams, a house with locked doors, a man waiting behind them, the sound of a bell. The woman had never been to Kentucky, yet she described the Pritchard estate with unsettling precision. Carr traced the story back to Marrow Creek, a place that had been missing from most modern maps. The locals tried to warn her. They said the ground itself was wrong there, that compasses spun, that animals refused to graze near the fences. but Carr was drawn to what she called patterns of inherited delusion. In the summer of 1973, she rented a small truck, packed her recording equipment, and drove out to the old property. The gates were still standing. Beyond them, the house sagged like a dying organ, windows blind with dust. Vines climbed the chimneys, the roof had partially collapsed. And yet, when she stepped inside, the air smelled faintly of flowers. Roses, she thought, but there were no roses anywhere near. She began her field study, recording each room, cataloging the furniture, taking photographs. Every door she opened seemed to lead to another smaller one, as if the house had been built to conceal itself layer by layer. In one room, she found rows of chairs facing a single, cracked mirror. In another, dozens of framed photographs turned backward against the walls. Each photo bore the faint outline of a woman's face, blurred, as if time itself had tried to erase them. On her second night, she heard music. It was faint, almost like static from her tape recorder. But beneath the hiss came the echo of a violin. Carr followed it through the corridors to the grand ballroom. There, at the center of the ruined floor, she found an antique phonograph. The record upon it was blank, but the needle moved on its own. Her notes from that night, later found in her satchel, read only this: "The house remembers." Days passed. Carr became obsessed. She no longer drove back to town for food or water. Her letters to the university grew shorter, then stopped entirely. Neighbors claimed to see her in the upper windows at night, whispering to the dark. When local authorities finally broke in 3 weeks later, they found her tape recorder still running. The last words on the tape were her own voice, trembling but calm. He kept them all here. Waiting for the vows to be finished, she was never found. Only her glasses resting beside that same blank record. After her disappearance, the house was sealed once again. And yet, decades later, the story refused to die. The Pritchard story might have faded completely, if not for a small-town reporter named Daniel Reeves. In the spring of 1996, Daniel was 29, ambitious and desperate for something bigger than the local crime blotter. When his editor mentioned an unsolved disappearance from the 1970s, some doctor who went ghost hunting in a decaying manor, Daniel saw an opportunity. He told himself he was going to write a debunking piece. He wanted to show how superstition and trauma still lingered in the American South. He didn't expect the house to feel alive. He arrived at dusk. The gates were rusted shut, so he climbed them, boots scraping against cold iron. The air smelled metallic, old dust, damp wood, and something faintly sweet like forgotten perfume. He carried only a flashlight, a tape recorder, and a camera with low batteries. Inside, his beam caught the remnants of someone's study. Books lay open, pages fused by moisture. Scattered across the desk were cassette tapes labeled in neat handwriting. Session 1, The Brides. Session 2, The Bells. Session 3, Samuel. They were Dr. Evelyn Carr's recordings. Daniel sat in the dark and played the first one. A hiss filled the air, followed by Carr's voice, tired, deliberate, trembling. He never let them leave. Even when they begged him to, he said a promise was forever, then silence, a click. Then another sound, soft, rhythmic, the tolling of a single bell. Daniel thought it was a glitch. He rewound. The bell rang again, perfectly timed. He turned off the player. The sound continued. He froze. It came from somewhere upstairs. Against every instinct, Daniel followed. The staircase groaned beneath his weight. His flashlight flickered, cutting in and out, casting long shadows across peeling wallpaper and half-burnt portraits. Each painting seemed to tilt slightly, as if watching him pass. He reached the landing and stopped. At the end of the hallway stood a door half open. Inside, a faint glow pulsed. Not from fire or electricity, but something softer like candlelight behind fabric. He stepped closer. The room beyond was filled with wedding dresses. Dozens of them, hanging from the ceiling like ghosts. Some pristine white, others aged to a dull yellow. Each one still bore a name tag. Margaret, Mary, Evelyn. And then he saw the last tag. It read Daniel. The camera slipped from his hands. The bell rang again, once, twice, 3 times. He stumbled backward, falling into the hallway. When he looked up, the door was closed, the light gone. Daniel fled the house and didn't stop until sunrise. He never published his article. He told his editor that tapes were blank, the story a hoax. But in private, he kept a single photograph he'd taken that night. It showed the ballroom, empty, except for a faint silhouette near the phonograph. A woman's figure with one hand raised as if to beckon. Years later, when Daniel died of heart failure, police found that photo framed on his wall, placed carefully beneath a bell. The strange part was, no one remembered him ever hanging it there. Time has a strange way of erasing what it cannot explain. By the 2000s, the Pritchard estate was nothing more than a ruin, swallowed by vines and silence. Developers tried to buy the land, but every deal fell through. Surveyors' equipment failed, drones lost signal, and local records kept reverting. Entire digital files simply vanished, leaving blank screens where documents should have been. Still, curiosity never dies. A few brave souls began exploring the grounds again, drawn by stories passed in whispers. Urban explorers filmed the rotting staircases, the cracked ballroom floor, the boarded windows. They joked, they laughed, until they played back the footage. In every recording, the sound of a bell echoed faintly behind them, no matter which part of the house they were in. And always, a voice, faint and measured, seemed to whisper over the static, "A promise is forever." The videos never gained many views. Within days of uploading, they'd disappear. The channels hosting them would be wiped, not banned, not hacked, just gone, as though they had never existed. And then there's this. A letter discovered in 2021, addressed to any future resident of Marrow Creek. The handwriting matched that of Dr. Evelyn Carr. The ink was still fresh. It read, "Every bride vanished on her wedding night because none of them were brides. They were witnesses. The ceremony was never finished. If you hear the bell, do not stay to count. Leave the vow unanswered." That's how it survives. No one knows who wrote the final line added in different ink, maybe decades later, until the last name is spoken. When the state finally demolished what remained of the estate, workers found fragments of glass embedded in the soil. Mirror pieces, each reflecting light even in total darkness. One of them bore the faint engraving of a name, Evelyn. They buried the shards and built a small memorial by the road. Locals say the bell still rings sometimes, soft, uneven, only once every few years. But if you're near Marrow Creek at night and you hear it toll, you'll feel the vibration in your bones first, like something old remembering your name. The house may be gone, but the vow remains. You're listening to Liturgy of Dread, where every story is a shadow left behind, and every whisper has a truth too heavy to carry in daylight. If you're still here, still watching, that means you've already heard the bell. Don't look for where it's coming from. Just remember, some promises were never meant to end. Subscribe if you dare, and I'll see you in the next darkness.